something I like to do. And the prairies are very horizontal, so I like to create this horizon line right through the building. And I get a lot of pleasure out of doing that. And you find that in a lot of my buildings. There's a line that goes right through as if the building is floating.
So it's the illusion.
Yeah, what belongs to the ground belongs to the ground, what belongs to the sky belongs to the sky, and they all just meet on the horizon line. It's fun. This building with its mica windows, like the old pot-bellied stove, you know, would speak of comfort. Many of the cabbies in Regina, they call it a church. And I like that idea because to me this is the temple to the things we worship in modern society. And what is that? Electricity, light, heat, cooling. This is the new trilogy in our society, is everybody wants comfort. So the building sort of spoke of that, and both ends glow at night just like the old pot-bellied stoves used to. The commission was actually given to Don Angus of H.H. Angus in Toronto, because he was a specialist in these kinds of systems. Did a lot of them in Eastern Canada especially, and the university gave him a short list of 3 architects, and I was the first architect he interviewed, and he went no further. And we had a wonderful relationship. If it hadn't been for Don, this building would never have been built, because the reaction at the university in Saskatoon was that this was going to be a very expensive building, and it was too avant-garde, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Don Angus was so thrilled because he had been doing these sort of run-of-the-mill heating plants all over North America, and this for him was an opportunity to do something more interesting. And he defended me all the way to the end. The way you get commissions is the timing is absolutely crucial. You have to set the stage, and you have to nurture it, and you have to pick just the right moment. CBC have their own in-house team of engineers and architects that do almost everything. The CBC building in Vancouver was designed by a private architect, and I was the second architect. And I got this commission in a roundabout way because they almost shotgun married me to an Eastern architect on this project. And I called up Al Johnson, who was the head of the CBC at the time, and I knew Al personally. I said, Al, they want to marry me to an Eastern architect, and I said, I will have no enthusiasm in implementing his design. And Al took it, and I got the whole commission. To give you an example how difficult this commission was, I had the Architectural Engineering Committee in Montreal, another building committee from Toronto, CBC, another building committee from Winnipeg, and the local, Mr. Hearn, who was the head of the CBC here at the time. And I had to satisfy all those people. And we had the right idea. The site was so small you couldn't even build it, because there was a cone of vision that ran right through the site. And that was a master plan cone of vision by Yamasaki. And we were not allowed to build in that cone of vision. So I was able to convince them that if they could look through the building, that might solve the problem. So that is the kernel of why the building is the way it is. And then you have a process that starts, which is the trouble with bureaucracy. It becomes a linear process. In other words, each committee meets, they make minutes of the meeting. The minutes are signed, and that is now locked. And you go forward one linear step at a time, and you lock things in. So then we started working on a building, and it started to grow in a linear way, and things got pushed in certain places. You know, the adjacency problems, who wants to be close to who and why and all that. And we got a rather mediocre building that was starting to evolve. I called the chief architect, and I said, you've got to fly up here. It was the middle of February, and all the snow in Wascana Center had been bladed into a big pile of snow on each side of the road. See, here's a question of timing. And it was dirty snow, you know, the black of the road. up on the pile of snow through Wascana Center. And you couldn't even see the legislative buildings from the lower parts of the new CBC building that was evolving. I just drove them quietly through Wascana Center. Got back to my office, I said, do we really want to do what we're doing? You've got the cafeteria down in the basement. They had to agree with me. And they were really quite beside themselves because we lost a lot of time. And I had about $30,000 invested in the design that far. And we had 4 little new designs that were not any bigger than this. That big. Beautifully drawn, in color. They were like Persian miniatures. And we sat down at the round table in my office and they said, well, what do we do now? And I sort of looked at the ceiling in mock pretense. I don't know what we're going to do now. And we brought out these 4 little Persian miniatures. So they start, you know, we like this one and we like this one for different reasons. We like this one. I had to sort of maneuver them because we had our favorite, which is the one that got built. So I had to make that happen, right? I just didn't leave it just to them. You know, we had to reason together. And we reasoned together until they all agreed that, you know, number 3 or number 4, I can't remember which it was the best solution. And we went on and built a building. I think if you look around at my building, you'll find that they're very crisp, they're very clear. Like a Tyndall stone, if you look really carefully at the CBC, you'll see that on the corners, rather than just having an ordinary corner, you'll see that there's a little groove. That groove tells you how thick the Tyndall stone is. So you can really understand it. Like we live in an age of wallpaper, you know. You have wallpaper that looks like brick. So isn't it nice to be able to feel the thickness of the skin of the building? And that's that one little detail. And the way the windows are set in clarifies to the beholder that this is real stone and it's 4 inches thick. I have a very strong feeling about entering. Almost all of my work I try to avoid difficult snow shoveling. I don't like stairs outside in this climate because they accumulate ice, and if they're on the north side, they really accumulate ice. So it's another dimension to architecture. It becomes part of a vocabulary. It happens to become my vocabulary, but it could be every architect's vocabulary. Have you noticed that the bridge is dead level? If the bridge could have been up a little or down a little. I hate ramps, basically. The ramp has its place, but I don't like ramps generally. I like this horizontal feeling, which is the prairies. And I love Venice for the same reason, because you just glide all the way through Venice on the same level, right, in the gondola. It's a nice feeling. The whole building was designed as a back alley building, and the back alley became an important street, which you find all through European cities. You know, it's not just Main Street. There are side streets. And there's an entrance for the handicapped and the service entrance, which is on grade at the back, and there are ramps inside and in the galleria, so you can get up to the main level. You don't tie onto buildings. You know, if they have any sculptural significance at all, you don't touch them. Well, it's killed the street. That's the thing that's wrong with it, not the fact that it's quite ugly, but it's the wrong thing to do. They could have gone underground or with a flying bridge and let the street, and that would have added a beautiful complexity to the campus, to be able to drive under something. Well, to me, design is really bringing something into focus, not just for one reason, but for several reasons. The windows are sort of a poetic statement in a way. They have a poetic result, but we had to have light in the building. Natural light would be better than in lighting it artificially. So both ends of the building are like a pot-bellied stove, the mica windows of a pot-bellied stove. I use that analogy of, you know, the early pioneers that, in fact, I myself used to huddle around a pot-bellied stove in the wintertime after coming home from a country dance, you know, and there'd be a hearth at the bottom of the stove to prevent the sparks and embers from falling onto the floor. And so this building has a hearth. And to give you an example of multi-reasons, is this hearth effect for this building, it achieved many things. It kept people away from the building. And you didn't want the public and children just wandering right up to this building because it is somewhat of a dangerous machine. And so the hearth gave you that sort of line of you don't cross over this line, and you wouldn't really naturally walk in crushed straw. So it worked beautifully without any big signs saying keep off the grass. The crushed rock allowed us to sink big oil tanks underground and other piping, and you could get at them later and service them and put new tanks in and add tanks. The site had been selected by the university. It had to be in a particular location in the master plan because of the distances that the piping would have to go, because it is a central heating and cooling plant. So there were certain criteria that this building had to meet. It had to have the exhaust stacks on the top of the building at a certain height so that the prevailing winds would take those fumes away from the campus. That was a very important criteria, which it is in every university where there are these plants. And so that was in the back of my mind as we started analyzing the problem. This is how we sold it to the university. We showed a typical plant, which was just a rectangular box with the chimneys on top of it, with guy wires bracing it so they wouldn't fall over, with cooling towers on the ground with frost fences around them. That was your run-of-the-mill engineering solution. And then I did this scheme, and I showed that if we could rearrange everything within that box into a triangular shape. That then allowed me to put a roof on that would shed water positively, and we wouldn't have a huge expanse of asphalt roof with venting and ducting coming through the roof, and the measles of modern architecture, which you see all through our cities. The roofscapes of the city are really quite pathetic, and it's the result of the flat roof being the only solution. See, the flat roof is very inexpensive to start with. You're not enclosing a large volume and so on. But this has a smaller volume than a big box. So the early studies showed that we could arrange all of the mezzanine equipment into a smaller area, and it allowed this roof to be created. And then I gathered all the plumbing vents and the smokestacks and the air intakes and all that into the apex of the building. You don't see them. So we have a building that has a certain elegance without all of this mechanical equipment. But the whole building is a piece of mechanical equipment. Corbusier was a very famous French architect who made the statement that a house was a machine for living. And that is one of the essences of modern architecture, is that everything is there for the function of the building. And it's the function that makes the building. Not that you pick a style and copy it and try to squeeze the function into it, which was the modus operandi for classical architecture. The Greek Parthenon became a bank, it became a church, it became a warehouse, a factory. And there was a rebellion in the Bauhaus in Germany, of which Corbusier was a member, and many of the other architects, Gropius and so on. And they rebelled against all of this false architecture. It had no reality. You didn't know when you looked at a building whether it was a bank or what. So they said that materials should be used in an honest and direct way, more like craft. And that's the whole foundation of modern architecture. So every building is a machine for doing what it's doing. And this building is certainly a perfect example of that. Well, that was my secretary and her husband, who wanted a new home, and she'd worked for me for a number of years. And it was only natural that if they were going to have an architect, they would turn to me.
So have you been back here at all since it's been built?
No, I haven't been inside.
Oh yeah.
But of course, I've driven by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's holding up really well.
Yep. Well, you can go have a look inside if you want.
Created an idea in terms of planning that the house can divide into three zones. If you close this side off, the family can come into the kitchen or into the front door. The friends can visit the family, the children, without disturbing the living room, the dining room, and the master bedroom, which is only on this side. See? Or vice versa, you can close that side off, and the kids can have their little party over there. Or you can close both sides off, and you have a sound trap.
Yeah.
Like a double wall, So you can have a very loud party going on over there or over here, and it's, you know, it'd be fairly good separation.
Really well. Yeah, I think these are all the original cabinets and everything still, too. So.
It's all oil. I don't like varnish. Everything was always oiled. This is just a raw linseed oil, and then wiped down after you put a coat on. You should actually do this once or every year. Actually, is what I used to do.
Yeah.
And these are the little door pulls.
Okay.
Instead of knobs, because that way you can go right up to the counter without hitting a handle. You know.
The first time we saw it, it had this, and then they put sheet vinyl on it to fix it up to sell it.
Well, how did you restore it?
I just scraped it off, and
Fantastic.
yeah, it was a bit of elbow grease.
That's a
but
fantastic story. I didn't know that was possible.
oh yeah. Well, this stuff's so durable; it can take anything. So yeah, it's great. Is your little drafting tables in here?
Huh. Well, I've totally forgotten about that, Rob.
Yeah, it's neat feature.
It even has a little crumb tray.
Yep.
Well, the heating system is somewhat novel. All the return air goes through the closets. All the odors and wetness that might exist on clothing is all dissipated. And then all the supply air comes up and behind these cabinets. And there's a small slit here, about 1/4 of an inch. And that slit bathes the glass with warm, dry air, which means that these windows never condensate. Have you found that to be true?
This one doesn't, but the other ones do.
Well, there's something wrong then.
Yeah, probably the balancing on the ducts is
something not right.
quite right. But.
And the mason who built these fireplaces, Larson, did a first-class job of the masonry work. When the fireplace has to be perfect on 4 sides, that takes a certain amount of intelligence to do that. Because most fireplaces are just stuck onto the wall and you sort of scribe the walls into after you're finished. Well, Larson was a really good man.
Pool is still here, in the bridge, which I think that was original, was it?
That's original, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Still safe to walk on.
I can't remember whether I designed that bridge or not, but the idea of the bridge going over it is original.
So was the fish pond your idea? Or was that
So the whole building was my idea.
Yeah, of course.
I don't work that way.
Yeah. But was it something the client specifically asked for, the fish pond? Or?
No. Suggested it to them.
Yeah.
They
That's great.
They like fish.
Yeah, it's a great feature though, that's for sure.
It's a chore to maintain it.
Yeah, not too bad. Clean it out once a year or something. It was actually covered over when I moved in.
See, all the ceilings are blind nailed.
Yeah.
And that's a detail that I've used a lot, and it's my own detail. And I had cut the millwork shop make a special cutter. So what you have is a long tongue in the right place. You know, there's a tongue, and then there's the female side of the joint has a longer lip on the top side, which means you can nail it completely blind. There's no nail show. Well, it's just a 2x4 cut at an angle, and then it's nailed on in such a way that all the nails are blind nailed. You don't see the nails. And it allows you to stagger the board so that you get a constant texture without an obvious joint in the system. So you have sort of a continuous thatch look to the edge. It's my own innovation. I've never seen it since or before, you know.
Have you used it on other projects?
Yeah, quite a few projects. I did a number of schools I did were done this way.
Oh yeah.
And there I was very fortunate again. You see, this has been a blessed place. You see, they could have just as easily put a builder's garage on, you know, Beaver Lumber Special. And they didn't. And that, you know, it cost more money to do this in brick with a pile foundation and everything.
Yeah. But it's sure held up well, that's for sure. It's still in perfect shape. So.
See, the whole city of Regina could be in perfect shape if the problem with foundations had been understood when they first started building this place. But then it costs more money, you see.
Yeah.
And first costs are the measure of almost everything in our society today. And people are prepared then to spend maintenance that far exceeds the initial cost of doing it right. You've done a really good job. You were the right man that came back. If somebody else had bought this, I shudder to think what would have happened.
Could be stucco.
Yeah. It was a very exciting time for me building this building. See, there's a pin about that big behind that steel plate up there, and these two arches come together, and the plate joins, and a big pin is put through. That was an exciting time when we put that pin in there, and then the minute the pin was in there, these arches would stand. These arches now are not even fastened to the buttresses. They just sit there by compression. They don't slide down, they don't slide up, and they couldn't, because if they did, the whole building would be in trouble, right? They call them arches, even though you may think of an arch as this. They're called arches because they have a compression. And this big arch comes down, and there's a steel plate inside where the arch actually rests on. But if I had fitted the arch to the buttress, the arch is going to move all the time, and it would crack. So it's another element of modern architecture. If you know where the movements are going to occur, you make them a feature of the design. It's like the tailoring of a good jacket. Every little stitch is doing a job, but it's also pleasing to the eye. You see the little bumps on top of the beams there?
Yeah.
And the little bump, the two bumps at the top? Well, these arches had to be cut at the factory, at the fabrication shop, because they were too long and the weight was too much for the highway, because there were weight restrictions. So it became an element in the design. And then those little bumps, they hide the fixings for the cranes to lift this. Now normally they just cement them in and try to hide them. And I said, no, we will articulate them. And they are like the buttons on my sleeve, you know. So that the way you actually build a building can be an expressive element in modern architecture. And that's what I look for, you know. Everything's an opportunity as you're designing, and things evolve. I didn't think about that until I got there. These glass screens all those mullions, like the middle mullions are over 40 feet. And they're only bolted at the bottom with 2 bolts. And the top is the slot. And if you can unzip that whole building. And they have taken 3 or 4 of those mullions out, taken the glass out, and moved a new boiler in. And the university wanted to put an overhead door into that wall. And I resisted it and argued, and I don't mean argumentatively, but I argued at the point that if they took the money for the overhead door and put it into a fund, the interest alone on that investment would pay for the dismantling of that wall from time to time. And they bought that rationale. And then you'll notice when we go inside that I have glass beside each one of the buttresses, because I wanted to express both from the outside and from the inside that this buttress was a freestanding thing doing its job. And that's another aspect of architecture, is the expressive reality of the building. You just don't hide things, you make them clear. And then you get exciting architecture. You know, like the purity of a sailing boat. Every piece of the sailing boat has got a job to do, and it's beautiful because it's been so well thought out. And that's what modern architecture is all about. And buildings that pass as modern architecture are not really modern architecture. They're just a copy of a style, which is a very different thing, you know. I've renovated the Holy Rosary 3 times, and I had a very good relationship with Father Wadey, who was the priest at the time. They serviced the cottage community on weekends, like on a Sunday, at a little church in Craven. And they were getting rather unhappy with that little church. You know, somebody would have to go out there and open up the windows and air it out, and it would be cold and miserable. So they wanted a new chapel. I went out with them and we looked at land opportunities all around that valley. We were getting desperate. We couldn't find any place to build this chapel. So we found that there was a housing development where that chapel now stands. And there was about 10 lots on that embankment that were for sale. And we walked into the center of this undergrowth and trees, etc. It was a 70-mile-an-hour wind blowing that day, and you could have read a newspaper down there without it ruffling even an inch. And I said, Father, why don't we build a church that has no walls? I said, that'll overcome your musty smell on a Sunday morning, won't it? And he liked the idea, and so that's how that was born. I convinced them to buy 5 lots so that you know, the building would be protected. But unfortunately now there are other buildings starting to crowd it, which is terribly unfortunate. I designed that entire building in my head with no drawings, and I had a Czechoslovakian architect working for me at the time. He was a lovely man, and he was a wonderful draftsman. And I explained exactly how all the pieces would go together, and he started drawing, and it came together very fast. It was a three-dimensional space frame. And the steel rod at the center goes to a hub, and the beams go out, and it's like a big truss, if you think of a bridge, you know. But it's a three-dimensional bridge. And then I have steel rods from each corner that pull the corners up to the apex, and there's a big steel pyramidal cap on that you don't see. These steel rods go up, and there's screws on, and you can fine-tune the structure and get it perfectly level and so on. It's been a very successful design. We made a chain system to let the water follow the chain, as water will do that, and then it goes into a drainage. It became the font. But it functions just as a drainage system, and then they bless that font for baptism. And then the deer, they winter in there. They love the space, you know, and they have shelter from the snow. One of the analogies I use is the thrashing machine or the combine. There's a whole bunch of filters in the machine shaking away, you know, and the coarse stuff, the straw stays at the top and goes out. The grain falls through with all the weed seeds, and then another filter, another screen shakes away, and the little small weed seeds, they fall down to the bottom, and then you end up with pure grain, right? The design process is a little bit like that. It is not a linear process in the best sense of the word. It's a random process. And as I sit there and shake myself, thinking about this, I'm thinking about how the building can fail. And as each failure becomes conscious to me, I then look for solutions to get rid of the potential for failure. And that is then the opportunity to create something that is just absolutely right. And this is what nature does. You know, the whole adaptation idea, you know, selection process of nature, Darwin explained it completely. Architecture is a wonderful pursuit. We need more of it.